welcome back to the channel. I'm trying to mix up the content a little bit here, and well, those that know me or those that see what I collect or otherwise will know that one of the things that I dearly love the most is the Indicator Blu-ray label. It's filled full of films that I have never seen nor heard about before, and that little box coming in every month is one of the very great joys that I have every month. It's very, very rare that I don't either really enjoy the film, or if I don't initially enjoy the film, that by the time I get to the extras and the package, etc. that's put in there, that it doesn't hold a new little piece of my heart in some way, shape or form. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about the January releases that came out from Indicator. I have a long-term goal this year of to finish and catch up with all of the Indicator releases this year. It's going to be a lot of watching, but I'm really looking forward to it. So we have this month's 4 releases, which are The Brute, Girl Struck Boy, The Blockhouse, and Hoffman. And well, what a month. This is kind of stunning. I mean, these are 4 films that obviously I knew nothing about. This definitely is one of the most interesting months that Indicator have ever put together. I think broadly speaking they themed the releases and grouped them together, and this month is absolutely no different. The theme for this month seems to be, restricted space or what happens behind closed doors, if more so than anything else. So the things that happen that aren't seen from the outside. And well, let's investigate to see what I thought of them one at a time. And we'll start with Hoffman, which is Peter Sellers and Sinead Cusack here, in what is pretty much a two-handed film. It tells a story at the start of Sinead Cusack's character saying she's going to go to her mother's to look after her and leaving her fiancé. And once the fiancé leaves, she turns on her heels and actually goes to meet Peter Sellers' character, who's a lone bachelor who seems to be living by himself. And she thinks, or the setup seems to be, that she is going there to prostitute herself in some way. In fact, she's been blackmailed. Peter Sellers' character has something on her fiancé, and if she does the right thing, then he will not say. So you have what is initially what seems a very seedy premise, or from a very seedy character here in Peter Sellers' character. But it becomes quite clear quite soon that there's more going on here than meets the eye. Because the seedy character of Peter Sellers is certainly a good bit older than Sinead Cusack's very innocent young ideals. She's very uncomfortable. She doesn't even know how she's going to go through with this. And when it doesn't happen, she reacts in a rather unusual way. Because Peter Sellers, while a lot older, it's not really specified how much older than he is. He's just a man that works at the office and that is a good bit older. And she has to spend 4 days with him. And then at the end of the 4 days, she can go back about her own ways. She assumes it's going to be to have sex with him for 4 days or that kind of thing. But a couple of days have gone by and that is not what has happened. And from being incredibly seedy, you have something that ends up being sort of innocent and sweet. And there's something, I think, if you watch with modern eyes, and especially in the modern world of objectification of women, you're caught between the setup of this I don't like actually, but what's happening here is sort of much more innocent and sweet, like I say. So it's a film that I actually ended up enjoying a lot. Actually, I laughed, I smiled a lot in this as it transformed from one thing to the other. And again, is a great example of a film that I don't think I would see otherwise. I think I've even flicked it on a BBC 2 and it was on 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. I don't think I'd have stuck with it. But because there's this release here, you endure it. And obviously Peter Sellers is excellent, but Sinead Cusack is really what makes this work. It's her portrayal of her innocence and her unsureness of herself as a person that really connects with the viewer. And not only do we have this really lovely release, I often talk about this, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot if I continue to do this again. The disc artwork for the Indicator releases is somewhat my favourite that they are. Now, the disc artwork here matches the alternate artwork that's in the inside here somewhat. Although I do like the original artwork a fair bit. But inside we have our usual booklet. And the booklet that we have here, we usually have a star in the front and director in the back, although Sinead Cusack's there as well. That's very similar. There are interviews with Sinead Cusack herself. You get the usual critical response that's in here, and then you get a few essays on the film itself. So, what is Hoffman? Destroyed by Pity. Interesting read this month and through this, although nothing that I think didn't illuminate more than was what was on the disc, because on the disc we have a number of extras. We have some selected scene commentary that lasts about 25 minutes on this. There is an interview with what is, now let me get the name of this right, it's the Focus Puller. Yes, the Focus Puller film. And to my mind, I didn't know what a focus puller is, so one of the really nice things about the release is that I got to find out what a focus puller was. There's a trailer commentary, there is a short documentary on the troubled making of the film and those kind of things. I love that kind of stuff. But like I say, the focus puller in it is the really interesting extra out of this, I have to say. It seems at the face of it like it's not going to be the thing, but you're talking with somebody who's got great fond memories of working on these films and actually getting their start in their career as that kind of thing. So that is Hoffman, a real treat. Which brings me on to the second film, which is The Brute, which is, I don't know if I could call this a treat. Is this a treat? Well, it's a film about domestic violence. Starring Sarah Douglas and Julian Glover, primarily as a couple. Sarah Douglas being very beautiful, but is married to a man who, for all intents and purposes, just wants to beat her about and throw her about. And at the start of the film, you get a very harrowing, I would say, illustration of this, where you actually think this is a home invasion movie, where she's there, she gets attacked, and she runs away and hides in skimpy attire. And the film moves on to discover that there are more people in these circumstances, friends of hers, or people that she knows, and they all seem to be sort of in the same camp of, oh, I love my mom, but they're doing this to me. And on one hand, this is, social commentary, but on the other hand, on the male side, they all seem to be very open and almost bragging about the fact that this is what they do, which is where, the disconnect happens for the film, and I think that's one of its major issues. But all the same, there's something really gripping and enticing into watching this movie. Some of it's really brutal. There's some quite graphic sex scenes in it, certainly in that form. And it's only when I went to look to see, well, the genesis of this film, that I seen that it was actually written and directed by that man, which is Jerry O'Hara. And Jerry O'Hara is somebody that I've done videos about before. I've done a couple of videos of BFI Flipside releases of the Pleasure Girls and A Girl Like That. Which are basically social comedy films about sexuality and about whether things are certainly right or wrong. And this, being a bit later in his career, certainly fits with those films and those ideas, and it's nearly exploitation in a lot of ways. In fact, some people might call it very squarely in the face exploitation. But there's something really, really gripping about it, and I think it's this vulnerability of the female actress, the threatening nature. It's almost like an action movie, and there's a real threat throughout the movie. And then about the resolution of that, and where people go to hide from that, the things that they do, the things that they are accused of, all of that kind of stuff. For me, another great watch. I really enjoyed watching this, even though the subject material is harsh in some ways, but very much encapsulates that 1970s Britain look, while having a sensibility and a watchfulness that maybe you don't always see. It says, typical Jerry O'Hara style. The byline at the back is, the film Women's Lib forced out of the cinema. And I can see why it would have been banned. There's no new commentary with Sarah Douglas herself and then with Kim Newman. I listened to that and I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a really great commentary. I mean, anytime you get to hear Kim Newman speak about a film, it feels like a real treat. There's a conversation with the director Jerry O'Hara, which I very much enjoyed because, like I say, I've quite a history of watching his films, which is great. You have a short film written and directed by Jerry O'Hara about surviving a disaster at sea. The more of that, the better. It's from 1976. And Week in Britain, an interview with the inspirational founder of the world's first refuge for women, and that's a COI, a Central Office of Information film as well. Packed full of great releases. And there's your disc artwork. I think the disc artwork's great. I mean, the screaming woman between the two legs that's silhouetted, and your booklet, which has a number of bits. So Why the Brute Matters, and that's by Alexander Heller Nicholas and Josh Nelson, and actually getting somebody like Alexander Heller Nicholas, who I've heard speaking on releases of violence against women, like The Nightingale, for instance. She's very prominent in, and in Romeo is Bleeding, she did a commentary for that. Her voice on this kind of subject matter is always great to see. You've got The Brute in Newcastle. Then you have Roberta Gibbs, action actress, blah blah blah. There are bits and bobs in here, and then you get your critical response, as always, at the back. So another wonderful release, something I really enjoyed, and another strong recommendation, I think, and a very indicator film, if that makes sense. You know, it's one of those gems that they have that are put out that otherwise I would never have seen. And again, if I'd seen the first 15 minutes, I probably would have turned off, thinking it was one type of movie, but it has good, strong social commentary at the end. Which takes me to The Blockhouse. Peter Sellers, Charles Aznavour, Jeremy Kemp, Per Oscarson, Peter Vaughan, Nicholas Jones, Leon Lissick, and directed by Clive Reese. Now, I've talked about an indicator type of film there. This is a very indicator kind of movie, because this barely has been seen or released or otherwise. It was supposed to get a theatrical release. It was very limited, and it is one of those films that has got its own story. The story of the making of the film is as interesting as the film itself. It tells the story of a group of men who on D-Day hid away from the shelling and the barracking that was going on in an underground bunker, and they get trapped inside. And they get trapped inside this cellar where there is a plethora of alcohol, wine and cheese and food. They are not going to starve. There are an absolute ton of candles for them to use, but there is no way of escape. And it is very much the story of how these men cope with being in isolation and in darkness, and dealing with their surroundings, and actually dealing with the fact that they're eating very fatty and alcoholic, and their intake is alcoholic, and how that devolves out. How do they entertain themselves? How do they relate to each other? Because they are prisoners and they happen to get in here. So in some ways they've gotten their freedom, but they're trapped again. And it's pretty much, it's a true story. So it's a true story from the world, although the timing and location are slightly different. But, you know, this actually did happen. And the events that happen are told throughout the length of the story. And I'd say for a good portion of this film, I thought this is a real clunker. And the reasons that I thought it was a real clunker were technical reasons, actually, more so than anything else. This was shot in location, and the lighting that was in there, because it was shot in location, is really poor. And while the restoration is done well, you can't replace the fact that there's lack of natural light or added light in this. And so it does kind of sap at you when you're watching it. Couple this with the fact that, again, recorded on site, captured the audio on site, the audio was not great, and actually a lot of the conversation feels muted. I had to put the subtitles on to really get a sense of what was going on, given that the visuals weren't exactly popping. And then for the last half an hour of the movie, I found, God, I'm really in it. I really cared for these people. You've got Peter Sellers in what was a very serious role at that time, and it's a pity he didn't do more, because I think he's excellent in this, like everybody else is. Everybody's very understated throughout it. There's a camaraderie there, and I think the end in it is perfect. I think there's a real poetry to it. I think you get the sense of the seriousness and the direness of the situation that they were in, the choices that they would have had to make, and also how it affects you, how you would have felt. You empathise with them. I think it's another terrific film. It's one that I really look forward to watching. We have our lovely artwork again, which is just a replacement of the front image on this case. Our alternative artwork, which isn't wholly different on it. And then we have our booklet. So we have our star, Peter Sellers. And then we have our director on the back. And again, we get our essays that go inside it. So the making of Blockhouse, how people buried it, how they didn't want it to get it out, and why it was a thing, how it made, the small budget it was made, and actually how it was such a passion project to Clive Reese that it wasn't for him championing it, then it wouldn't have been made. We have the stories of the incident. Then an interview with Clive Reese, which again goes to talk about how much that he enjoyed that. And then an interview with Peter Sellers that goes through. Now, it doesn't just talk about the Blockhouse, but he talks about his career. And then the critical response as well. On top of this, there is a number of interviews that sit with it. There's a short conversation with Leon Nissick, who's one of the actors in the film. He gets to talk about his experience on the film. Then you have the son and widow of Clive Reese talking about how the film was made and how the portrayal of it and the subsequent legacy of it affected their father. You have the production manager talks about how, you know, he sourced some material for the making of the film. And then you have a couple of cuts of the film. You have the presentation from the distributor and then the director's version. And the main difference is really around the ending. And even from the first showing, there's a lovely story about at the film festival how Clive Reese swapped in what he wanted to be the ending and it wasn't agreed with by the production house. So that is Blockhouse. Again, super interesting, super revealing, and another one of those films, like, who would have seen this film without the indicator release? Which brings us to the last one, which is Girl Stroke Boy. And well, this is a film from the 70s about gender identification. Well, it is. That's what it's about. It's about a husband and wife whose son's coming home to visit. He's been away for a while and he's bringing his new partner, his new girlfriend. They can't wait to meet her. They talk about how open and liberal they are as people, and she's brought home and they can't work out whether that it's a boy or a girl. And this throws their life into sort of disarray because they are liberal, open-thinking people, but actually this is a real problem and they're worried about the neighbours finding out. They're supposed to have neighbours round for dinner to meet the returning of the prodigal son home, and we'll have to do something about this. This is not a thing that we can really talk about. And the mother and the father are the real stars of this. I mean, we've got Joan Greenwood and Michael Hordern, and they're just fantastic in each scene because they portray these people that say they're very open and accepting and devil may care as long as everybody's healthy, but actually they have got their own intrinsic inadequacies or prejudices that they just cannot quite get over. And certainly the father is trying his best. And the film bounces around this idea of them does it really matter, while also having this veneer of, well, can you work out whether it's a boy or a girl? And of course none of that really matters. It's kind of this almost like drama comedy, which kind of plays with an awful lot of these ideas. What will the neighbours next door think? All of that kind of stuff. And it's really, really, really charming. I think it's never preachy, it's never judgy, much to its credit. But what you get is a film that is interesting to explore. And the bit at the back that says, you know, we haven't lost a son, we've gained a question mark, says an awful lot. You have the happy couple on the booklet here, as you can see. And then, of course, director on the back. And again, we have another great booklet. Tells the story of the film and its reception, which I think at the time is very interesting to explore because, you know, obviously there isn't I wouldn't have said there was a really great appetite for that kind of stuff then. I think it would be even challenging now. You've got the director Peter Straker, so a little preview of him, and then the fact that this was based on a West End play called Girlfriend, where they tried to take an awful lot of the cast and make the film with them, and then of course the critical response that was in there as well. I think this is a real charming film, like I said. We have some interviews again as part of the extras, we have the interview with the person that played the girl stroke boy in it, and actually how that made them feel. I think that's really interesting. You've got an interview, one of those radio interviews with John Scott, with the composer. You have film historian Alex Davison considers the impact of it, which I think again is another thing that you'd be looking for from a release like this. And then there's a short called A Couple of Beauties, which deals with sort of similar things, but in a much more kind of lewd, I would say, a more predictable way. It did make me think of some of the BFI Flipside releases, like London and The Raw, actually. It did have that kind of feel, that short did, when I watched it. So, another terrific, terrific release. And have you picked up the January releases from Indicator? What did you think of them? Like I say, very different this month, and I enjoyed all four immensely. In fact, this might be one of my favourite ever months, which kind of is why I'm doing this video. If that makes sense. So let me know what you thought about the releases, and I'll speak to you soon, and I hope you are all keeping very well. All the best. Bye.